My name is Robert, I'm 72 years old, and this is the story of how my four-legged companion became my voice when I lost mine. I lived in a cozy house in the Riverside neighborhood of Portland, Oregon, along with my wife Helen and our border collie, Duke. It was a Thursday morning, April 8th, when my life changed completely. I woke up, as always, at 6 in the morning. The sun was beginning to peek over the hills surrounding Portland, painting the Oregon sky with pink and golden tones that only those who live in the Pacific Northwest know. Helen was already in the kitchen preparing coffee, and the aroma of fresh bagels she had bought from Murphy's Bakery down the street filled the entire house. Duke, as usual, was lying beside my bed, watching me with those intelligent amber eyes that always seemed to decipher my thoughts. "Good morning, Duke," I murmured, scratching behind his soft ears. He wagged his tail enthusiastically and followed me to the kitchen, where Helen had already set the table with our favorite blue checkered tablecloth. "Good morning, honey," she said, hugging me around the waist. "How did you sleep?" "Like a rock," I replied, sitting in my usual chair. Duke positioned himself strategically to my right side, as he had done for 7 years since he was a puppy, patiently waiting for some piece of cheddar cheese that I always saved for him. It was a sacred routine we followed religiously. After breakfast, I used to take Duke for a walk in Laurelhurst Park, while Helen organized the house and tended to her plants on the back porch. Afterwards, I would spend the mornings reading The Oregonian in the sunroom and caring for the rose beds I cultivated in the garden. Duke always accompanied me, sometimes napping in the shade of the century-old oak tree or chasing the squirrels that came to eat the fallen acorns. That day, however, something was different. During breakfast, I began to feel a strange pressure in the back of my neck, as if someone were tightening my head with a vice. I tried to hide it, imagining it was just fatigue. The day before, I had helped our neighbor load furniture into his moving truck. "You look a bit pale, Robert," Helen commented, pouring more coffee into my mug. "Are you feeling okay?" "Just a headache," I replied, trying to smile. "Must be my blood pressure. I'll check it later." But the pain didn't subside. On the contrary, as the morning progressed, it became more intense and localized. Around 9:30, when I was pruning the roses in the garden, I felt a sudden dizziness that made me stagger. Duke, who was sniffing something near the gate, immediately abandoned his activity and ran to me, pressing his body against my legs as if trying to stabilize me. "What's wrong, old boy?" I tried to ask, but I realized my voice came out slurred, almost incomprehensible. That's when panic hit me like lightning. I tried to call for Helen, but the sound that emerged from my throat was just a strange noise without forming words. I felt my right side begin to lose sensation, and the pruning shears slipped from my right hand. Duke began to act completely atypically. He ran in circles around me, barking in a way I had never heard. They were high-pitched, almost desperate barks, interspersed with low whimpers. His pointed ears were completely erect, and he looked directly into my eyes with an almost human intensity. "Woof, woof, woof," he barked insistently, alternating his gaze between me and the house as if trying to transmit an urgent message. Helen appeared at the back door, still holding a dish towel. "What's all that noise, Duke?" she shouted. But when she saw me leaning against the fence, her face immediately transformed into a mask of terror. "Robert," she ran to me, grabbing my left arm firmly. "My God, what's happening?" I tried to explain what I was feeling, but only guttural sounds came from my mouth. Tears began to roll down my face when I realized I had completely lost the ability to communicate through speech. It was at that moment that Duke did something extraordinary. He ran inside the house and came back carrying Helen's cell phone in his mouth, a completely new behavior for him. Delicately, he placed the device at Helen's feet, sat down, and looked at me intently, as if saying, "Now you can call for help." "Oh my goodness," Helen murmured, picking up the phone with trembling hands. Duke brought the phone. He understood we need to call someone. With nervous fingers, she dialed 911. "Hello, 911? Please, I need an ambulance urgently. I think my husband is having a stroke." While we waited for the ambulance, Duke adopted a protective behavior he had never shown before. He lay down beside me on the garden ground, placing his furry head on my legs, and began to emit a low, comforting purr, similar to what cats do, but which I had never heard from a dog. "Stay calm, honey," Helen whispered, caressing my face. "Everything's going to be okay. The paramedics are on their way." Duke remained motionless beside me, but his amber eyes never stopped studying me. It was as if he were trying to memorize every expression on my face, every gesture I made with my hands. There was an almost disturbing intelligence in that gaze, as if he were processing information about my new state. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes, a record for Portland, but for me it was an eternity. The paramedics were extremely professional, explaining each procedure to Helen while they examined me and placed me on the stretcher. "Ma'am, the dog can't accompany us in the ambulance," explained the paramedic gently, a young woman with a compassionate smile, "but you can follow us in your car to the hospital." When they lifted me on the stretcher, Duke tried to jump up to come with me, being held back only by the leash Helen was holding firmly. His eyes followed me until the moment the ambulance doors closed. During the journey through Portland's busy streets, through the ambulance's side window, I could see our blue Honda following right behind. In the passenger seat, I could distinguish Duke's silhouette, keeping his head raised and alert like a soldier on a mission. At Oregon Health and Science University Hospital, I was immediately taken to the neurological unit. The diagnosis came quickly: ischemic stroke with compromise of Broca's area. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the chief neurologist of the unit, a middle-aged woman with short hair and a confident gaze, explained the situation to Helen. Your husband Robert suffered a cerebrovascular accident that specifically affected the region responsible for speech production, she said, using a professional but humane tone. We managed to stabilize him quickly, which is very positive. However, the recovery of verbal capacity can be a long and complex process. Helen squeezed my left hand, the only one that still responded normally. Doctor, will he be able to speak again? We're going to immediately start an intensive rehabilitation protocol with speech therapy and physical therapy, the doctor replied. But it's essential that you be prepared to explore alternative methods of communication: gestures, writing, assistive technology. There are many possibilities. I remained hospitalized for 9 days. Helen visited me religiously morning and afternoon, always bringing news from home and mainly detailed reports about Duke's behavior. The stories she told me were intriguing and touching. Robert, he's completely changed, Helen told me on the 5th day of hospitalization. Duke isn't eating his kibble normally. He carries his bowl to your armchair in the living room and eats there, as if keeping you company. And there's more. He takes your clean socks from the clothesline and organizes them in rows at the bedroom door, as if preparing your clothes. This information moved me deeply. Duke had always been a cheerful and independent dog who loved to play in the yard and chase birds. Knowing he was showing such intense signs of grief and loyalty touched me in a way I couldn't express even through gestures. The day of my hospital discharge was indescribably exciting. When Helen opened the front door and I entered using a cane, still with motor difficulties on my right side, Duke literally exploded with joy. He jumped, ran in circles, cried with emotion, but in a much more contained and careful way than he used to show before. Look how he's welcoming you, Helen observed with tears in her eyes. It seems like he understands that you're different, more fragile. That first night back home, while I tried to get used to my new condition of involuntary silence, Duke did something that surprised me completely. He climbed onto our bed, something he had done only a few times during his 7 years of life, and lay down carefully beside me, placing his head on my shoulder. It was as if he were telling me, through this simple but powerful gesture, that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would be by my side to face them together. And it was in that moment of shared silence that I began to perceive that Duke was no longer just my pet. There was something new in his amber eyes, a different way of observing me and reacting to my movements, which suggested that our relationship was about to transform in an extraordinary way. I couldn't imagine that in the coming days I would discover that my faithful border collie had developed an almost magical ability to interpret my gestures and anticipate my needs, transforming himself not only into my companion but into my new voice in a world that had suddenly become silent for me. If you're getting emotional about this true story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any chapters. The first week after my return from the hospital was a difficult period of adaptation for all of us. Helen had to learn to interpret my basic gestures, while I fought against the constant frustration of not being able to express even the simplest thoughts. But it was Duke who surprised me from the very first day. The morning after my return, when I tried to get up from bed to go to the bathroom, I felt dizzy and leaned against the wall. Duke, who had slept on the floor beside the bed, immediately got up and positioned himself on my right side, exactly the side that was weaker. He pressed his body against my leg, offering physical support while I walked slowly down the hallway. "Robert, look at that," Helen exclaimed from the kitchen, observing the scene. "Duke is helping you walk." At first I thought it was coincidence, but as the days passed I realized that Duke had developed a completely new pattern of behavior. He anticipated my movements in an almost supernatural way. When I woke up and sat on the edge of the bed, he immediately positioned himself on my right side, offering support. If I pointed toward the kitchen, he would run ahead and wait for me there. If I gestured toward the bathroom, he would accompany me and sit at the door like a faithful bodyguard. The most striking moment happened on the 3rd day. I was sitting in the living room armchair trying to read the newspaper when I began to feel thirsty. I raised my hand and made a gesture I thought might represent drinking water. I brought my hand to my mouth as if holding a glass. Duke, who was lying at my feet, immediately raised his head and looked at me attentively. For a few seconds we stared at each other. Then surprisingly he got up, went to the kitchen, and began barking near the refrigerator. "What's wrong, Duke?" Helen asked, coming from the laundry room. Duke barked again, looking alternately at Helen and me. That's when she noticed my gesture still frozen near my mouth. "Do you want water, Robert?" she asked. I nodded affirmatively, and Helen brought me a glass of water. But the most impressive thing was Duke's reaction. He came back to me, sat by my side, and watched me drink, wagging his tail as if proud of having translated my need. "This isn't normal," Helen commented that night while we were having dinner. "Dogs don't make this kind of connection on their own." In the following days, I began deliberately testing this new ability of Duke's. When I pointed to my medications on the kitchen table, he would run there and bark until Helen noticed. If I put my hand on my forehead simulating a headache, he would go to the cabinet where we kept medicines and scratch at the door. The most impressive situation happened in the second week. I was in the yard, sitting in the rocking chair under the oak tree when I began to feel unwell. My blood pressure had risen and I felt chest pain that worried me. I tried to call Helen, who was cooking, but she didn't hear me. I looked at Duke, who was playing with a small ball. I clapped weakly to get his attention, and when he looked at me, I put my hand on my chest and made an expression of pain. What happened next left me speechless. Duke immediately abandoned his game, ran to the kitchen, and began barking in a specific way. They were short, insistent barks, completely different from his normal barks. Helen appeared at the door, and Duke ran to me, returned to her, and repeated the process 3 times. "Robert." She ran to me. "What's wrong?" I pointed to my chest and grimaced in pain. Helen immediately got the blood pressure monitor and discovered it was 180/110, dangerously high. "We're going to the hospital," she said, already grabbing the car keys. During the trip to the emergency room, Duke rode in the back seat, restless, constantly looking at me. At the hospital, we discovered I was having a severe hypertensive crisis that could have caused a second stroke if not treated quickly. "You arrived just in time," said the attending physician. "Another half hour and it could have been serious that night." Back home after the scare, I looked at Duke in a completely new way. He had not only interpreted my request for help, but had developed a specific vocabulary of barks for different situations. Helen had also noticed. "Robert, I think Duke is learning to communicate with you in a way I've never seen before. It's like he's becoming your interpreter." I decided to start documenting these interactions. With my left hand, the one that still worked well, I began writing in a notebook every time Duke demonstrated this translation capability. I discovered he had developed at least 5 different types of barks. One for when I needed medical help, short, insistent barks. Another for when I wanted water or food, deeper barks near the kitchen. A third for when I needed the bathroom, low barks near the hallway. A fourth for when I wanted Helen to come to me, high-pitched barks directed toward wherever she was. And a fifth for emergency situations, desperate barks accompanied by running between me and the nearest person. Besides the barks, Duke had developed specific physical behaviors. If I pointed upward, he understood I wanted to stand up and would come support me. If I pointed downward, he would bring a stool or cushion. If I made a circular movement with my finger, he understood I wanted him to look for Helen around the house. The most notable transformation, however, was in the way Duke observed me. His amber eyes had acquired an almost human intensity. He studied me constantly, as if deciphering a complex code. Any change in my facial expression, any different movement of my hands, any alteration in my breathing tone, everything was registered and processed by him. Helen began calling Duke the 4-legged nurse. "He watches you better than some doctors I know," she would say, laughing. But for me, Duke had become something much deeper than a nurse. He had become my voice in a world that had suddenly become mute for me. And I was beginning to realize that our unconventional communication journey was just beginning. In the 3rd week after my return from the hospital, something happened that would completely change my perspective on animal intelligence. I was in the living room, trying to watch television, when I remembered I had forgotten to take my heart medication at 2 in the afternoon. It was almost 4 o'clock. I looked at Duke and began making random gestures, trying to convey the idea of medicine. I put my hand to my mouth, pointed toward the kitchen, tapped my chest. Duke watched me attentively for a few seconds, tilting his head to the sides as he did when processing information. Then, completely unexpectedly, he got up, went to the kitchen, picked up my heart medication bottle in his mouth, and only that specific medicine, among the 6 different ones I took, and brought it to me. My eyes filled with tears. Duke had not only understood that I needed medication, but had identified which specific medication I needed. How was this possible? Helen, who witnessed the scene, was as moved as I was. "Robert, this isn't normal. Duke is demonstrating a level of understanding I've never seen in any animal." That night, while Duke slept beside me in bed, I began to reflect on what was happening. My 7-year companion had transformed into something extraordinary. He wasn't just reacting to my gestures. He was anticipating my needs, interpreting my emotional states, and communicating back with me through a complex system of signals we were creating together. It was as if the stroke that had taken away my speech had, paradoxically, opened a communication channel between Duke and me that transcended the limitations of traditional human language. We were developing our own language, a language made of glances, gestures, barks, and a mutual understanding that was deepening each day. And I was beginning to realize that this journey of discovery was far from over. Continue following this incredible story of loyalty, and don't forget to turn on notifications. The first month after my stroke brought surprising discoveries about Duke's capabilities. What began as simple interpretation of gestures had evolved into something much more complex and sophisticated. My border collie not only understood what I needed, he began to anticipate my needs before I even expressed them. One Tuesday morning, while Helen had gone out to shop at Whole Foods, I experienced what would be my first medical emergency alone with Duke. I was in the living room watching CNN when I began to feel the signs of a hypoglycemic crisis. Being diabetic for 15 years, I immediately recognized the symptoms: cold sweats, trembling hands, and a sensation of weakness taking over my entire body. The problem was that my glucose kit was in the kitchen, and I felt I wouldn't have the strength to get there alone. Worse still, Helen had left only 15 minutes ago and wouldn't return soon. Duke, who was lying near the television, lifted his head and looked at me with that intensity I already knew well. His amber eyes fixed on my face, and he tilted his head to one side, as he always did when he perceived something was wrong. I tried to make gestures indicating I needed sugar, bringing my hand to my mouth repeatedly and pointing toward the kitchen. Duke observed me for a few seconds, then got up and ran to the kitchen. I heard sounds of objects being knocked over, and soon he returned, carrying in his mouth exactly what I needed, the jar of candy that Helen kept in the pantry for emergencies like this. "How did you know, Duke?" I murmured, my voice still weak but emotional. He placed the jar at my feet and sat beside me, watching me eat 3 candies in succession. As my glucose normalized, Duke visibly relaxed, lying down again but keeping his eyes alert to any change in my condition. When Helen returned from the grocery store an hour later, she found Duke still by my side, vigilant. I told her what had happened, and she was impressed not only with Duke's quick reaction but with his precision. "Robert, he brought exactly what you needed," she said, petting Duke. Among so many things in the kitchen, he chose the candy. How can he know about diabetes and hypoglycemia? This incredible story of canine loyalty is getting more and more exciting. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. In the following days, I began to notice that Duke had developed an even more impressive ability. He could identify subtle changes in my health condition before I even perceived them. It was as if he had become a walking medical monitor. One afternoon, while I was watering the roses in the garden, Duke began acting strangely. He approached me and began sniffing insistently at my right hand, then ran to Helen in the kitchen and began barking in a specific way. They were low, prolonged barks I'd never heard before. "What's wrong, Duke?" Helen asked, coming to the garden. Duke returned to me and repeated the behavior, sniffing my hand and looking at Helen alternately. That's when she noticed my right hand was trembling slightly, a tremor so subtle I hadn't even noticed it. "Robert, your hand is shaking," she said, worried. "Let's check your blood pressure." The pressure was 170/100. Not dangerously high, but altered enough to explain the tremor. After I took the medication and the pressure normalized, the tremor stopped, and Duke immediately relaxed. "He noticed the change before we did," Helen observed, impressed. "How is that possible?" I began researching dogs' ability to detect physiological changes in humans. I discovered that some dogs are trained to detect epileptic seizures, blood sugar alterations, and even some types of cancer through smell. But Duke had never received any specific training. He was developing these abilities intuitively, motivated only by love and the need to protect me. The discoveries about Duke's capabilities multiplied in the following weeks. He learned to distinguish between different types of pain I felt. If I touched my head indicating a headache, he would go get the pain relief. If I put my hand on my chest, he would bring the heart medication. If I pointed to my legs indicating muscle pain, he would bring a pillow for me to elevate my feet. But the most impressive discovery happened on a Saturday night. I was watching television when I began to feel depressed, a common feeling among stroke patients. The frustration of not being able to communicate adequately, combined with the dependence I felt on Helen, made me melancholy at times. Duke, who was sleeping on the rug, suddenly got up and came to me. He put his head in my lap and began making a low, comforting sound, almost like purring. Then he left the room and returned carrying my favorite slippers in his mouth, the ones I always wore when I wanted to relax. It was as if he were telling me, "Come on, put on your slippers and let's take a walk in the yard so you feel better." And it worked. We walked together in the yard for a few minutes, Duke always by my side, and I really felt better. He had detected my emotional state and taken specific action to help me. "Duke is becoming a therapist," Helen commented, watching the scene from the kitchen window. During this time, we also began receiving visits from other family members and friends who wanted to know about Duke's extraordinary abilities. My brother Michael, who lived in Seattle, came to visit us one Sunday with considerable skepticism. "That must be an exaggeration," he told Helen. "Dogs don't have all that ability to understand people." But during his visit, I began to feel tired and wanted to go lie down. I made a subtle gesture to Duke. I just yawned and discreetly pointed toward the bedroom. Duke immediately got up, went to the bedroom, turned on the fan using his paws, something he had learned by watching Helen do it, returned to me, and accompanied me there. Michael was left speechless. "That's impossible," he murmured. "How did he know you wanted to lie down and even turned on the fan?" The intelligence of this border collie is surprising everyone. Keep following us and subscribe to our channel. But Duke's abilities went beyond physical needs. He began developing a remarkable understanding of routines and schedules. Every day at 2 in the afternoon, he would bring me my heart medication without me asking. At 5 in the afternoon, he would bring my slippers, knowing it was time for our walk in the yard. At 8 at night, he would accompany me to the bedroom as he knew I liked to read before sleeping. The most impressive thing was how Duke had learned to communicate with other people about my needs. When Helen wasn't home and visitors arrived, Duke assumed the role of intermediary. One day, my sister-in-law Linda came to visit while Helen was at the doctor. I began to feel thirsty, but Linda didn't understand my gestures. Duke observed the situation for a few seconds, then went to the kitchen, brought a glass in his mouth and placed it in front of Linda, then ran to the refrigerator and barked. "Oh, Robert wants water," Linda exclaimed, finally understanding. Duke had literally translated my need for someone who didn't know our gesture language. These experiences made me realize that Duke wasn't just reacting to my signals. He was developing his own form of reasoning, a problem-solving ability, an empathy that transcended any scientific explanation I could find. But perhaps the most emotional moment of this phase happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was on the front porch watching the street activity when I saw an elderly woman who had tripped and fallen on the sidewalk in front of our house. Instinctively, I wanted to run to help her, but my limited mobility didn't allow it. I began making desperate gestures toward Duke, pointing to the woman and trying to convey the urgency of the situation. Duke looked where I was pointing, then looked at me and immediately understood. He ran to the gate, began barking loudly to draw attention, then ran to the kitchen where Helen was preparing lunch. "What's wrong, Duke?" she asked, but he kept barking and running toward the gate. Helen followed him and saw the fallen woman. Together they helped the elderly lady who had just slipped and wasn't seriously hurt. "If it weren't for Duke, I wouldn't have seen her," Helen said afterward. "He understood that you wanted to help the lady and alerted me." That night, while Duke slept at the foot of my bed, I reflected on how our communication had evolved. We were no longer just a man and his dog. We were partners in a form of communication that transcended the barriers of traditional language. Duke had become my eyes when I couldn't see far, my voice when I couldn't speak, and my heart when I couldn't express what I felt. Our journey together was just beginning, but I already knew I had discovered something extraordinary about the capacity for love and understanding between different species. And the most incredible thing was feeling that Duke was also learning from me. It was as if we were creating together a new way of existing in the world, a way based on mutual understanding, patience, and unconditional love. The second month after my stroke brought new challenges that tested not only Duke's abilities but also the limits of our special communication. It was during this period that we discovered our connection went far beyond what we had imagined. The first major test happened during a stormy night in May. Portland was experiencing one of the worst rainstorms of the year, with strong winds and frequent power outages. Around midnight, the electricity in our neighborhood went out, leaving the house completely dark. I was sleeping when I was awakened by a strange noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded like something had fallen. Helen also woke up, but hesitated to get up in the total darkness. That's when I noticed Duke wasn't in his usual place at the foot of the bed. "Where's Duke?" Helen murmured, worried. I tried to get up to look for him, but in the darkness and with my limited mobility, it was dangerous. That's when we heard Duke's footsteps coming down the hallway, and he appeared at the bedroom door carrying a flashlight in his mouth. The same flashlight we kept in the kitchen drawer for emergencies. "Oh my God," Helen sighed. He brought the flashlight. Duke placed the lit flashlight at the foot of the bed and returned to the kitchen. We followed the sound of his paws and discovered that one of the cabinets had opened, with the wind coming through the window, knocking down some jars. Duke was carefully cleaning up the pieces, pushing them into a corner with his paws so no one would get hurt. "He's protecting the house," Helen observed, impressed. "It's cleaning up the dangerous pieces." But the most impressive part came when the rain intensified and water began entering through the laundry room window. Duke ran to the storage room, brought old towels in his mouth, and began strategically placing them on the floor to absorb the water. "He's thinking like a human being," Helen commented, watching Duke organize the towels efficiently. "How does he know towels are for absorbing water?" That night, I realized Duke had developed not only the ability to interpret my needs, but also to take independent initiatives to protect our family. He had become a true guardian of the house. This story is showing animal intelligence that goes beyond normal. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. A few days later, we faced an even greater challenge. Helen needed to be hospitalized for emergency gallbladder surgery. Suddenly, I found myself alone at home with Duke for the first time since my stroke. Helen's surgery was scheduled for Tuesday morning, and she would stay hospitalized for at least 3 days. My brother Michael offered to stay with me during the day, but couldn't sleep at the house because of work. "You'll be fine," Helen told me the night before surgery, clearly worried. "Duke will take care of you." The first night alone, I felt the weight of my condition. It was the first time since the stroke that I was completely dependent only on myself and Duke. The responsibility seemed overwhelming. Duke, as if sensing my anxiety, didn't leave my side for a minute. He slept literally glued to me, with a paw over my chest as if monitoring me during sleep. The next morning when I woke up, Duke was already awake watching me. He waited for me to get up by myself, but stayed close in case I needed support. He went to the kitchen and brought my morning medications in the correct sequence, something he had observed Helen do hundreds of times. The real challenge came at lunchtime. Helen always prepared my meals, and I had never tried to cook alone after the stroke. My motor coordination was still limited, and using only my left hand for everything was frustrating. I tried to prepare a simple sandwich, but dropped some ingredients on the floor. Duke immediately began cleaning, pushing the pieces into a corner. Then something extraordinary happened. He went to the refrigerator, brought the peanut butter jar in his mouth, then returned and brought the bread. It was as if he were telling me, "Let me help you organize the ingredients." With Duke's help bringing items one by one, I managed to prepare my lunch. He had not only understood my difficulty, but had found a practical way to help me. During the afternoon, I felt emotional thinking about Helen in the hospital. Duke sensed my state and did something that deeply moved me. He brought a family photo that was on the living room table and placed it in my lap, then laid his head on my legs. It was his way of consoling me, reminding me I wasn't alone. That night, when my brother left, Duke completely took over caring for the house. He checked all doors and windows as he had seen Helen do. He brought my nighttime medications. He accompanied me to the bathroom whenever necessary, and he slept next to me all night. During the 3 days Helen was in the hospital, Duke behaved like a true caregiver. He developed his own routine, waking up before me to check if I was okay, organizing my medications, helping me with meals, and at night doing his security rounds around the house. When Helen returned from the hospital, she was impressed with how Duke had assumed the responsibilities. "Robert, he took care of you better than a professional nurse," she said, petting Duke. "Look how well you are." It was true. I had spent 3 days alone without any serious problems, thanks entirely to Duke's dedication and intelligence. But the final test of Duke's abilities came a few weeks later, during a situation none of us had anticipated. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Helen had gone to visit a friend in Beaverton. I was in the garden watering the plants when I began feeling symptoms of another hypertensive spike. This time, however, it was different, more intense, and accompanied by nausea. I tried to go back inside the house, but my legs failed and I fell on the grass. I couldn't get up, and I felt it was something serious. Duke, who was playing near the gate, immediately ran to me. He sniffed my face, looked into my eyes, and I could see concern stamped on his expression. I made gestures indicating I needed medical help, but Duke had already understood the gravity of the situation. He ran inside the house and returned with the cell phone in his mouth. Since I couldn't dial it with my hand shaking, Duke did something incredible. He took the phone, went to the front gate, and began barking in a way I had never heard. They were loud, desperate barks that echoed throughout the street. It was as if he were asking for help from anyone who could hear. Our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, a 60-year-old woman who lived next door, appeared at the window. "What's wrong with Duke?" she shouted. Duke ran to her, then back to me, and repeated the movement several times. Mrs. Johnson, realizing something was wrong, came out of her house and came to our yard. "My God, Robert," she exclaimed when she saw me fallen. "I'm calling an ambulance." Duke had literally saved my life by seeking external help when he realized the situation was beyond his ability to resolve. At the hospital, we discovered I had suffered a severe hypertensive crisis that could have resulted in a second stroke if not treated immediately. "You arrived just in time," the doctor told Helen, who had rushed to the hospital. Another hour and the consequences could have been irreversible. When we told the doctor about Duke's behavior, he was fascinated. "This dog demonstrates a level of emotional intelligence and problem-solving ability that is extremely rare," he said. "It's as if he had developed professional caregiver skills back home." I looked at Duke with gratitude I couldn't express even through gestures. He had become much more than my companion or interpreter. He had become my guardian angel. That night, while he slept beside me, I reflected on how our relationship had evolved in just 2 months. Duke had not only learned to interpret my needs, he had developed the ability to make independent decisions, solve complex problems, and even seek external help when necessary. Our nonverbal communication had become so sophisticated that sometimes I felt we conversed, like two old friends who had known each other for decades. A look, a gesture, a change in posture, all of this had become our shared language. And the most impressive thing was realizing that Duke continued learning and evolving every day. Our journey of mutual discovery was far from over. The 3rd month after my stroke brought an unexpected change in our lives. The story of Duke's extraordinary abilities began spreading through the neighborhood and eventually reached the ears of people working in the medical and veterinary fields. It all started when Mrs. Johnson, our neighbor who had helped me during the hypertensive crisis, told the story to her daughter Patricia, who worked as a physical therapist at OHSU Hospital. Patricia was so impressed that she decided to share the story with her colleagues. A week later, we received an unexpected visit. It was Dr. Marina Roberts, a neuropsychologist specializing in post-stroke rehabilitation, accompanied by Dr. Fernanda Costa, a veterinary behaviorist. They had come to meet Duke and document his abilities. "Mr. Robert," said Dr. Marina, "we'd like to observe the interaction between you two." What has been reported to us suggests Duke has developed spontaneous therapeutic abilities that could be studied and even replicated. For the next 2 hours, the professionals observed our routine. They saw Duke bring my medications at the right time, interpret my basic need gestures, and demonstrate his ability to seek help when necessary. "This is extraordinary," commented Dr. Fernanda. "Duke is demonstrating behaviors we normally only see in dogs with years of specialized training. He developed these abilities intuitively, motivated only by the emotional bond with you." What most impressed the specialists was a specific demonstration. I simulated different types of discomfort, headache, chest pain, dizziness, and Duke reacted differently to each situation, seeking specific items or alerting Helen in distinct ways. "He has a complex mental protocol," observed Dr. Marina. "Each type of discomfort generates a specific response. This indicates a very sophisticated level of cognition and associative memory." The professionals asked permission to document our case and eventually publish it in a scientific journal. They explained that our story could help develop training programs for therapy dogs. "Duke could become a model for training other dogs to assist post-stroke patients," explained Dr. Fernanda. "His intuitive techniques could be systematized and taught." This incredible story is gaining scientific recognition. Don't miss the next chapters. Subscribe to our channel. A few weeks later, we were invited to participate in a lecture at the Portland Neurological Rehabilitation Center. The goal was to present our experience to other post-stroke patients and their families, showing how animal-assisted therapy could be beneficial. The lecture took place in an auditorium with about 50 people, patients, family members, doctors, and therapists. Helen spoke for me, telling our story from the day of the stroke to the most recent discoveries about Duke's abilities. Duke was with us on stage, calm and attentive. During the presentation, he demonstrated some of his basic abilities, interpreting my gestures and bringing specific objects I requested. The most emotional moment was when a woman in the audience, Mrs. Hope, who had also recently suffered a stroke, began to cry. She was accompanied by her daughter and explained that she felt very isolated because she couldn't communicate adequately. Duke, without any command from me, came down from the stage and walked to Mrs. Hope. He sat beside her chair and placed his head in the woman's lap, offering comfort completely spontaneously. "He realized she was sad," Helen murmured, moved. Mrs. Hope's daughter was impressed. "Mom hasn't shown affection for any animal in months," she said, "but look how she's petting Duke." After the lecture, several people approached to talk with us. A man named Roberto, who cared for his post-stroke wife, asked if we could help him train his dog to develop abilities similar to Duke's. "Could you teach my Rex to do these things?" he asked hopefully. Dr. Marina, who was present at the lecture, explained that each situation was unique, but they were developing an experimental program based on the techniques Duke had developed naturally. In the following weeks, our house became a meeting point for several families going through similar situations. Helen and I received people interested in meeting Duke and learning about our experience. One of these visits was particularly significant. Mr. Augustus came to see us, a 68-year-old man who had lost speech after a stroke 6 months earlier. He was accompanied by his wife, Mrs. Ellen, and brought with him their dog Luna, a medium-sized mixed breed. During the visit, Duke interacted with Luna in an interesting way. It was as if he were teaching the other dog about how to observe and react to human gestures. Duke demonstrated specific behaviors, like bringing water when I pointed to my mouth, and Luna watched attentively. After a few hours of interaction, something surprising happened. Mr. Augustus made a gesture similar to mine, indicating thirst, and Luna, who had observed Duke all afternoon, imitated the behavior and brought a water bottle. "My goodness," exclaimed Mrs. Ellen. Luna had never done that before. It was as if Duke were transmitting knowledge to other dogs, teaching them how to care for their owners with special needs. Dr. Fernanda, when she learned of this experience, was fascinated. "Duke is demonstrating teaching ability," she said. "He not only learned complex behaviors but can transmit them to other animals. Duke's ability is inspiring other dogs." Continue following this journey and subscribe to the channel. During this period, our daily routine also evolved significantly. Duke had further refined his abilities, developing new behaviors that constantly surprised us. He learned to read my mood through subtle signals I didn't even realize I was emitting. When I was cheerful, he would bring his ball to play in the yard. When I was melancholy, he would bring items that comforted me, a family photo, my favorite book, or simply lie beside me offering silent company. Duke also developed a behavior we called medical rounds, 3 times a day. He would do a complete assessment of my condition, smell my breath, detecting possible alterations, observe my eyes, check if my hands were shaking, and verify if I was walking normally. If he detected any alteration, he would immediately alert Helen through specific barks or differentiated behaviors. One morning during his morning rounds, Duke detected something I hadn't even perceived. He smelled my breath and immediately ran to Helen, barking in a way that indicated medical urgency. "What's wrong, Duke?" Helen asked, worried. Duke returned to me and began insistently sniffing my mouth. That's when Helen noticed a slight different odor in my breath, a sign that my blood glucose might be altered. We measured the glucose and discovered it was at 300, dangerously high. I hadn't felt any symptoms yet, but Duke had detected the alteration before it became critical. He detected the uncontrolled diabetes through smell, Helen said, impressed. How can he know that? This experience made us realize that Duke had developed not only interpretation and communication abilities, but also early diagnostic capabilities that rivaled medical equipment. Duke's impact on my recovery was undeniable. My self-esteem had improved significantly. I felt less dependent and more confident knowing I had such a dedicated and competent companion by my side. My blood pressure was more stable, my episodes of depression had decreased dramatically, and my quality of life had improved notably. Even my physical therapist, Dr. Juliana, had noticed accelerated progress in my motor recovery. "Mr. Robert, your motivation for recovery has increased a lot," she observed during a session. "Having Duke as a therapeutic companion is accelerating your rehabilitation process." It was true. Duke motivated me to try new things, overcome limitations, and maintain a positive attitude even on the most difficult days. Our partnership had become therapeutic not only for me but for all the people who knew our story. At the end of the 3rd month, while reflecting on everything we had experienced, I realized that Duke had not only adapted to my condition, he had taught me a new way of living, a way based on nonverbal communication, mutual trust, and unconditional love. Our story was becoming a source of inspiration for many people, and I knew there was still much more for us to discover together. 6 months after my stroke, our life had found a new rhythm, but the surprises with Duke continued. What began as a survival necessity had transformed into something much greater, a legacy of love that would impact many lives beyond ours. The most significant transformation happened when we received an unexpected proposal from the Oregon Rehabilitation Association. They wanted to create a pilot program based on the techniques Duke had developed intuitively, and they invited us to be volunteer instructors. Mr. Robert explained, the project coordinator, Dr. Claudia Martinez. Duke has naturally developed techniques that take us years to teach professionally trained dogs. We want to document his methods and create a training protocol. The idea was ambitious. Use our experience to train other dogs to assist post-stroke patients and people with communication disabilities. Duke would literally become a canine teacher. We accepted the challenge, and our house became an informal training center. Twice a week, we received families with dogs who wanted to develop abilities similar to Duke's. Duke's first student was Beethoven, a 3-year-old Labrador whose owner, Mr. Charles, had lost mobility after an accident. Duke patiently demonstrated how to interpret gestures, how to fetch specific objects, and how to alert other people in case of emergency. It was fascinating to watch Duke teaching. He would repeat specific behaviors several times, wait for Beethoven to imitate. And when the other dog got it right, Duke would show approval through play or affection. Duke is being a mentor, Helen observed during one of the sessions. He understands he's teaching. After 3 months of training, Beethoven had developed basic assistance skills. They weren't as sophisticated as Duke's, but they were sufficient to significantly help Mr. Charles in his daily routine. This incredible journey is inspiring an entire assistance program. Subscribe to the channel to follow until the end. Parallel to the training program, our story gained media attention. A journalist from the Oregonian wrote an article about Duke, which was republished in several other newspapers across Oregon. The article's title was Border Collie Becomes Interpreter for Elderly Man Who Lost Speech. After stroke in Portland, the report detailed our journey and included testimonials from healthcare professionals about the importance of animal-assisted therapy. After publication, we began receiving messages from people across the United States interested in learning about our experience. Many were families facing similar situations, others were healthcare professionals wanting to learn about Duke's techniques. One of the most touching messages came from a woman in Denver whose husband had recently suffered a stroke. "Your story gave us hope," she wrote. "We started observing our dog Max more carefully, and we're already noticing some behaviors that might be signs he wants to help too, but the most significant recognition came when we were invited to participate in the American Congress of Neurology, which would take place in Chicago. It would be the first time a dog story would be presented at a scientific event of this magnitude. The trip to Chicago was an adventure in itself. Duke had never flown before, but he behaved exemplarily during the flight, remaining calm and attentive to my needs even in a completely new environment. At the Congress, our presentation was scheduled for the last day. In a special session on innovative therapies and neurological rehabilitation, the auditorium was packed with over 300 neurologists, physical therapists, and other healthcare professionals. Helen gave the presentation while Duke and I demonstrated our special communication. The audience remained in absolute silence when Duke correctly interpreted a series of complex gestures I made, fetching specific items and even diagnosing a simulated discomfort I demonstrated. At the end of the presentation, the applause was prolonged and emotional. Several neurologists approached to ask technical questions about Duke's behaviors. This case demonstrates the extraordinary plasticity of the canine brain, commented Dr. Henry Ballard, one of the country's most respected neurologists. Duke has developed cognitive abilities that suggest a level of emotional intelligence comparable to some children. Another specialist, Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, was particularly interested in the interspecies communication aspect. You've created your own language, she observed. This has profound implications for our understanding of nonverbal communication and emotional bonds. Back in Portland, we continued our volunteer work, but now with greater responsibility. We knew our experience was contributing to scientific advances that could benefit thousands of people. Duke, at 8 years old, had become a local celebrity. Neighborhood children came to visit him, other dog owners sought advice, and healthcare professionals frequently consulted us about specific cases. But for me, Duke remained simply my best friend, the one who had given me a new way of living when I thought everything was lost. The most emotional moment of this entire period happened during one of our training sessions. Present was a 10-year-old girl named Sophia, who was born with cerebral palsy and had severe communication difficulties. Sophia was accompanied by her parents and Honey, a young golden retriever the family hoped to train to assist their daughter. During the session, something magical happened. Sophia tried to make a gesture indicating thirst, but her limited motor coordination made the movement almost imperceptible. I wouldn't have noticed it myself, but Duke immediately approached the girl, looked at her intently for a few seconds, then ran to the kitchen and brought a water bottle. Sophia smiled, a radiant smile that illuminated the entire environment. Her parents were in tears. She had never been able to communicate so clearly with anyone, said Sophia's mother. Duke understood what she wanted. Honey observed the entire interaction attentively. In the following sessions, the golden retriever began imitating Duke's behaviors, learning to interpret Sophia's subtle gestures. 3 months later, Honey had developed sufficient skills to significantly assist Sophia. The girl gained independence, self-esteem, and a much better quality of life. Duke didn't just save your life, Sophia's father told me during a visit. He saved our Sophia's life too. Today, 1 year after my stroke, I see that our journey transformed into something much greater than I ever imagined. Duke not only gave me back the ability to communicate, he taught me that there are forms of connection that transcend words. Our training program has already helped more than 20 families. 5 dogs trained by Duke are working as assistants to people with various disabilities. 2 hospitals in Portland have adopted protocols based on the techniques Duke developed. But beyond the numbers and recognition, what moves me most is realizing how our story continues to inspire people. We receive letters from across America from families who found hope in our experience. One of those letters, which I keep with special fondness, came from a woman in rural Montana. Mr. Robert, your story taught me that true love doesn't need words to be expressed. My husband also suffered a stroke, and now we look at our dog Tobias with different eyes. We're already noticing signs that he wants to help us. Today, as I write these words with my left hand, which has almost completely recovered coordination, Duke is lying at my feet, as always. Occasionally he lifts his head and looks at me with those amber eyes that once deciphered my desperation and transformed it into hope. Our communication has evolved so much that sometimes Helen jokes that Duke and I converse telepathically. It's not telepathy, of course. It's something much more powerful. It's living proof that unconditional love can overcome any barrier. Duke taught me that losing speech didn't mean losing the ability to communicate. He showed me there are languages of the heart that are more powerful than any word. And most importantly, he proved to me that we're never alone when we have someone who truly loves us. Our journey continues. Every day, Duke and I discover new ways to connect, to help each other, and to share our love with others who need it. He didn't just translate my needs. He translated the universal language of unconditional love. And that's a language we can all learn, regardless of our limitations or challenges. Duke taught me that true love always finds a way to express itself. This is our story, the story of how a border collie became not only my interpreter, but my teacher about the true meaning of love, loyalty, and hope. The capacity for love knows no boundaries. Thank you for following this incredible journey of Duke and Robert.